You keep telling yourself that something has to change. Your body, your work, your money, your confidence, your life. And maybe you're right, but there's a problem you probably don't want to admit. You keep asking for a different life while protecting the exact routine that created this one. You want the result to change without changing the system that keeps producing it. And that's why months can pass while it still feels like you're trying. Not because you don't know what to do, because somewhere underneath all the frustration, you're still hoping reality will eventually make an exception for you. Most people imagine change as a dramatic moment, a decision, a breakthrough, a sudden burst of motivation. You wake up different. You finally feel ready. Something clicks. But real change is usually much less cinematic. It looks like losing access to the version of your life that keeps you comfortable. And that is exactly why people avoid it. Because when you say you want something to change, you're usually thinking about the outcome. You want to feel better, earn more, stop procrastinating, become more confident, build something, leave something behind. But every outcome is connected to a structure, a set of habits, a set of environments, a set of people, a set of excuses, a set of small decisions you repeat so often they become invisible. You don't experience your life as a system. You experience it as just how things are. That's the trap. You can dislike the result while still being deeply attached to the process that creates it. You can hate being tired and still protect the routine that destroys your sleep. You can hate feeling stuck and still spend every evening exactly the same way. You can hate your lack of progress and still defend every distraction that keeps you from progressing. And because none of those individual choices feel important enough to explain your entire life, they're easy to excuse. One more night, one more week, one more month. Nothing dramatic happens. That's the danger. Your life usually doesn't collapse because of one huge decision. It drifts because thousands of tiny decisions keep pointing in the same direction. And eventually you look around and call the destination bad luck. This is why wanting change can become strangely addictive. Wanting change gives you emotional relief without forcing you to pay for it yet. You can imagine the future version of yourself. You can think about what you'll do, plan it, talk about it, watch videos about it, feel frustrated about it. And all of that creates the sensation that something is moving. But desire is not movement. Awareness is not movement. Even frustration is not movement. Sometimes frustration becomes part of the routine. You complain about the same problem so consistently that complaining starts to feel like your response to the problem. And because you're emotionally reacting to it, you assume you're also changing it. You're not. You're just having a strong feeling inside the same structure. That's why some people can be sick of their life for years. They are genuinely sick of it. They're not lying. They really do want something better. But wanting the new life and being willing to lose the old one are two different things. That's the part nobody likes. Every real change has a cost before it has a reward. Not necessarily money, familiarity, comfort, identity, predictability, sometimes even relationships. If you change enough, your normal stops feeling normal. The people around you may not understand it. Your old routines stop fitting. The easy excuses become harder to believe. You lose the ability to pretend you could do it anytime. Because now you're actually doing it. And strangely, that can feel worse at first. When nothing changes, your potential stays perfect. You can still imagine that you could be disciplined, could start the business, could get in shape, could become confident, could make the thing, could leave the situation. Someday. Potential is comfortable because it can't fail. Action can. And there's another reason the old pattern is so hard to leave. It gives you something familiar to blame. As long as your life stays the same, you can keep telling yourself that the real problem is timing, circumstances, other people, bad luck, lack of energy, lack of opportunity. And maybe some of those things are genuinely real. But the pattern also protects you from a much more uncomfortable question. What happens if you remove the excuse and still struggle? Because then the problem becomes personal. Then you have to face your actual level, your actual discipline, your actual patience, your actual ability to tolerate being bad at something before you become good at it. That's much more threatening than staying frustrated. Frustration lets you imagine that there is a better version of you trapped underneath the circumstances. Action tests whether that version exists yet. And most people would rather protect the possibility than risk getting an answer they don't like. So they keep the conditions unchanged, not because they consciously want to fail, because unchanged conditions preserve an unchanged story. A story where your potential is still untouched, your future is still open, and your real attempt still hasn't happened yet. The moment you change something real, reality starts giving you information. Maybe you're worse than you thought. Maybe it takes longer. Maybe nobody cares at first. Maybe the first attempt is embarrassing. Maybe you have to become a beginner again. That's why keeping everything the same has a hidden benefit. It protects the fantasy. As long as you don't fully change, you never have to find out what happens when you actually try. So you stay in this strange middle state, unhappy enough to dream about change. And the longer you stay there, the more convincing the excuses become. You start collecting evidence for why now is a bad time. You're too busy, too tired, too uncertain. You need more information. You should probably wait until things calm down. And individually, every reason sounds reasonable. That's what makes them dangerous. Because almost nobody ruins their future with one obviously stupid decision. They do it with hundreds of decisions that each make perfect sense in the moment. You keep choosing what feels justified today, and then you're surprised when all those justified choices add up to a life you never actually chose. That's how stagnation hides. It rarely feels like giving up. It feels like having a good reason to wait one more day, comfortable enough to avoid it. And then you wait for motivation to solve the conflict. But motivation can't solve a conflict you keep voting against. Because every day, your behavior is a vote, not a moral judgment, not proof that you're lazy, just a vote. If you say you want one thing, but your repeated choices support another, your life follows the repeated choices. It has to. Reality doesn't care which version of you gave the better speech. It responds to what keeps happening. That sounds harsh, but it's also useful. Because it means your life is not waiting for some mysterious internal transformation before it can move. You do not need to become a completely different person first. You need to stop demanding a different outcome from an unchanged pattern. That's a much smaller problem, and a much more uncomfortable one. Because now you can see where change actually begins. Not with a new identity. Not with a perfect plan. Not with suddenly feeling motivated. It begins when one part of the old system is no longer allowed to stay the same. Maybe that means the phone doesn't come into the room. Maybe the application gets sent before you feel ready. Maybe you stop giving yourself the same excuse at the same time every day. Maybe you leave the environment that keeps pulling you back. The specific action is different for everyone. The principle isn't. Something has to become different enough that the old result is no longer inevitable. And that difference doesn't need to impress anyone. It only needs to interrupt what keeps happening automatically. Because once the pattern breaks, even slightly, the next decision is no longer predetermined. That's what change is. Not a feeling, not a promise, not a future version of you arriving to take over. A break in the pattern. And the first break often looks almost insultingly small. That's why people ignore it. They want a transformation dramatic enough to match the frustration they feel. But your life is mostly built from things too small to feel dramatic. So the way out is usually small too. One repeated decision changes. Then another. Then another. And after enough of those decisions, the life that once felt fixed starts producing a different result. Not because you finally became special, because you finally stopped feeding the machine that was creating the old one. So if you keep saying that something has to change, pay attention to the sentence. Something has to change. Not someday. Not emotionally. Not in theory. Something in the structure has to become different. Otherwise, nothing is malfunctioning. Your life is simply giving you exactly what your current patterns are designed to produce, and it will keep doing that with perfect consistency until you give it something new to work with.